Hi, Matt here. This is just a content warning just to say that later on in the episode there will be talks of themes surrounding suicide, drowning and self-harm. Thank you.
We made this.
Welcome all to Pick a Disc, the podcast where they pick them and then they talk about them. I'm your host Matthew Latham, and each episode a guest will appear on here and talk about an album that they want to talk about, be it a favourite or one they just like for some reason and just want to babble on. If they want to talk about it, they can do it here. For this first episode, the debut one, I spoke to Kurt North. Kurt is a podcaster from up north and is an avid music fan himself. We talked about U2's Achtung Baby, how it was a departure from their older stuff.
That was recorded in 2018, December 2018, ready for airing on the something of January 2019, and that was 100 episodes ago. You are listening to episode 100 of Pick a Disc. I am your host Matt Latham, and this is the podcast that's always been about someone picking a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to. And this is episode 100, and I've been self-hyping myself for this for so long. This has been a goal for me since I started the podcast to get to 100 episodes. I am quite amazed I've done that. And the person picking the disc today is me. It's another Matt pick. Every 10 episodes it's a Matt pick, but this one's really special. I've got a guest host, and the guest host is Branden P, and he'll guide you through which album that I'm going to be talking about. But it's probably the world's worst kept secret anyway, but you'll find out in a minute. But, you know, if you like the podcast, lie and commit opinion fraud, give us 5 stars. You can subscribe on any podcast app of choice, and you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter under Pick a Disc, and there is also the Discord that you can follow, or you can join the Discord server and say hello. And before I unleash episode 100 on you, I want to take this moment just to thank every guest that have been on here, every person who has said anything nice to me about the podcast, any person who said anything horrible about the podcast, anyone who's ever done anything in support of this podcast, be it a like on Twitter, be it a retweet, being a like on Instagram, being just anything to help keep me going on this podcast. I just want to say it means so much. And as much as I have the tendency to be self-deprecating on an almost performative level, and perhaps slightly on a, oh my god, Matt, we should be slightly worried at how self-deprecating you are, I generally have a lot of fun doing this podcast. Editing, I could probably do without, but you know, I've not met a podcast editor who likes the editing that much. But aside from that, I have had a lot of fun doing this podcast. I've met a lot of people. I've made good friends through the podcast network that I'm on. I've made the extended independent music podcast network has been ever so friendly, and I cannot express how much fun doing this podcast has been. And if that sounds like a goodbye, it's not. There is an episode 101, and I have no intention of stopping, but I just want to take this moment to say thank you to everyone who's ever done anything, and I can't stress how much I want to say thank you to everyone. But yeah, this is episode 100. I am so proud and glad to be able to play this for you. So let's talk to Branden.
Welcome to episode 100 of Pick a Disc.
Dun dun dun.
This voice may sound a little different. That's because I am Branden Palomo, host of the Better Band Pearl Jam podcast, here today to put the spotlight here on Matt. Now, episode 100, it's a big deal for any podcast, this one being no different. Of course, this is a Matt Picks episode, and he has chosen the third album from Los Campesinos, Romance is Boring, released January 26th, 2010 in the United States, and then for some reason, 1st February 2010 in the UK. They just, in 2020, had a remastered edition reissued on 14th February. And so we are here to bask in that afterglow of the 10th anniversary, but it's the 12th anniversary. But COVID happening around that time and all sorts of weirdness going on. Let's get Matt in here so that he can begin to gush about this banger of an album. Matt, welcome to your own podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Long time hoster, 10th time guest. So, so glad to be here, Branden. Great introduction to the album. Interesting you bring up COVID. As we get to a section near the end of the podcast, I'll have to bring that up because there's a nice lining up of, well, not nice lining up, but there's interesting you bring up COVID and the 10th anniversary. So, I'll bring that. That's gonna be seeded. That's seeding something later on.
Oh, okay. Yes, around that time too, when they released the reissue of it or remaster of it, they had a oral history. The Universe Provides, or Universe Replied, rather, that sort of came out at the same time. Sort of limited edition. Was not able to get a hold of a copy myself. I believe you have one though, Matt, right?
I do, yes. And it's currently downstairs in my work bag because I've been reading it during my lunch break last week. So I can't show it up on the webcam, but I do, yes. I didn't buy the remaster because I already got the album on vinyl, but I got but I did read the whole thing as well because it aligned with the 10th anniversary, and I remember reading it on the train to London to watch them perform the album live, but which I'll talk about later on. But it's a great treasure trove of information.
So let's hold on. I'm trying to get to. I've got so many windows open. There's tabs and tabs and tabs. Lyrically, this is a very dense, and you need to see all of those up there. So, Matt, I'm going to let you walk us through a little bit of how you came to. Let me frame it like I frame my own podcast because I'm familiar with that. Matt, when did you first hear of Los Campesinos?
This is quite vivid. I have vivid memories of how I discovered Los Camp, and this is going to jump back a bit of an overlap of what I was talking about in episode 90, when I was talking about kind of soundtracks and like trying to curate my own for movies that movie scripts I attempted to write. So many years ago, I was part of a writing community. It's how I met Tony Black, who's the head of the We Made This Podcast Network this podcast is on. And one of the things we used to do, we used to kind of write scripts and like original scripts and everything. And I remember writing, or planning at least, and doing every single thing possible apart from actually write the thing in final draft. Kind of like a film, kind of like a movie script. It was kind of like based in university because I was at university age at the time, or just finished, and I was writing a script that was based on kind of university age characters in a fictional kind of seaside resort town in the UK. And as I said in like the Yellow Jackets, Yellow Jackets podcast in episode 90, I was kind of like almost starting to kind of get into things like Skins, and I think The In-Betweeners a couple of years later, and they've got really strong soundtracks. And one of the things at the time was MySpace, and the fictional characters on Skins had their own MySpace pages. There's a lot of heavy promotion about MySpace, and one of the things I really quite liked was the soundtrack or the music supervising, looking for bands that weren't kind of well known, or like they seem to hunt for stuff. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna this script that I'm writing, I'm gonna go and create my own playlist. And I will share, because I've managed to find every song on YouTube, because not all of them on Spotify. I will share a YouTube playlist of every song that was on that that fictional soundtrack. But I spent ages kind of looking through the MySpace pages, and they had like charts that you could get and they'd have like signed artists and unsigned artists. And I was looking through the unsigned artists, like UK indie kind of charts, going through some stuff. In parallel, I was quite into the song 5 Years Time by a band called Noah and the Whale. I don't know if you're aware of the song at all, or...
I know the band, but not that song.
Yeah, it's probably their biggest hit here. It's very weird to say, like, to think of them on the same kind of like sonic level as Los Campesinos, but I really like that song, so I put the song 5 Years Time. Okay, that's going to go on the soundtrack. And I was looking on Amazon at the album, thinking of buying it off Amazon, and I remember reading one of the reviews and talking about this Noah and the Whale album, and I can't remember the exact phrasing, but they mentioned, goes, oh, if you're liking them to their like current indie contemporaries, Los Campesinos. And that's the first time I ever saw the name Los Campesinos in a review for a Noah and the Whale album. And I was like, oh, okay. But I never thought much about it until like about half an hour later, when I noticed the name showing up in this MySpace chart. And I went onto their MySpace page, and the song that played was a cover from Heavenly, which is called Seize the Heavenly Option. And I was like, oh, this is a really nice kind of twee music. Oh, quite like this. And I stuck Seize the Heavenly Option onto the soundtrack. And I think a couple of days later, I was just listening through, and I was basically, I think at this point I was kind of job hunting as well. So pretty much my days would be go up, look at the job sites, and then basically fart arse all the rest of the day on MySpace. And I went on to the Los Campesinos page, listening to the song again. I was like, oh, what else have they got? And I think embedded on their page, they had the music video for the song My Year in Lists. And the kind of decision that would change, kind of, that would, like, this is like one of, where you get certain moments in your life that kind of like decisions that you make that will kind of alter the trajectory of it. So this, pressing play on a YouTube video was this for me. So I started listening to My Year in Lists, and I was like, man, actually, I really quite like this. Then suddenly, there's the breakdown in that song where they go, I treasure with fondness the day before I met you. And suddenly something clicked. If this was a film, there would suddenly be a CGI animation of the music going into my ear, following it through into a CGI kind of recreation of my brain where there's a gap in one of the synaptic pathways, and that piece of music will form a bridge. And suddenly things clicked, and I'm like, bloody hell, that's a really good lyric. And then immediately kind of looked online, bought the album, and I actually found the kind of order, the order history in Amazon of the dates. I found that, and then that lyric kind of just like, wow, what's this band? And bought the album. A few days later, the album turned up, and this is the first album. Hold on now, youngster. And I just suddenly got obsessed with this album. I'm like, what the flipping heck is this? And the rest, they say, is history.
About when was this? When the that first album was out?
So that album came out, I think, I did check this earlier and I've suddenly forgotten. I think the album came out around February. So it came released in February. This was at some point in the summer of 2008. So this was like the start of August, because it was something like mid-August that order. The order for that album was on Amazon, so I ordered it on something like the 5th of August or something. So this was like a few months after the first album, and then, but this was before We Are Beautiful, We Are Doomed that was being released at the end of that year, which was not a second album yet. Pretty much the next order in my order history on Amazon was me ordering or pre-ordering We Are Beautiful, We Are Doomed, because that came out, I think, November-ish. But I ordered it on the 26th of September. And so that was very, very quickly around that time that I was like, oh yeah, okay, I need to. It's one of the first times I remember pre-ordering an album for a band as well.
You know,
Again, not an album yet. So it was around that time, around like mid to late 2008.
so then like pretty much you heard it and you were hooked and you've been with them the rest of this whole time, right?
Yeah. So pretty much before this album, before Romance is Boring came out, so I've just been like following them, like, yeah, and anything they suggest to listen to, or anything that algorithms would suggest, goes, oh, if you like these, listen to these. Yeah, they kind of hooked me in and would pretty much shape my music listening history up until this day.
This is their third album. What is it about this album, or is it possibly something that happened in your life around this time when this album came out that really hit you and was like, okay, this is the Los Campesinos album I want to talk about, and that I will pretty much make a whole podcast for so that I can get a chance to talk about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've kind of embargoed myself from talking about this band and this album on other podcasts, so other podcasters might be sick of me talking about it now. The floodgates have been opened, but no, with this album, I think my kind of interest or kind of discovering of kind of live music appeared just before it as well. I'm not going to get too much into that yet. I'll save it for the live music bit because they've got an impact on that as well. But I think my kind of, I think I've managed to find, if not a scene, a kind of genre of music that I could say was my thing. I never really saw myself as like one particular like genre of music, but in some places I still don't. But I think this was the gateway for me to kind of like finding like a musical identity, and like I never saw myself as a music fan, which is kind of weird for someone who's hosts a music podcast. But I think this was the band that hooked me in, which I'm going to assume that I think like the equivalent would be Pearl Jam for yourself, where you said that Pearl Jam was pretty much like the band that probably you would say was a formative part of your music identity. I think Los Campesinos was that for me as well, only it occurred to me slightly later in life, in my early 20s, rather than the teenage years that like every other person probably would do. But when this album, I think this is kind of like a mixture of what they would begin to sound like to this day, but still have the kind of energy and the kind of manicness of the first two albums, because the first two albums are very twee, very manic, whereas their later stuff is very Paul Heaton, Beautiful South, House Martins influenced. This is kind of like the sweet spot into that, so they've kind of matured and shaved off a few of the kind of not fully justified criticism, because I do quite like the tweeness, but they often got like very lumped in the twee and criticised for that bit in the first stuff, in the first kind of like mini era of the band, before they kind of moved towards a more kind of mature sound. I think this is that kind of sweet spot in that it's a very mature and kind of grown up album in comparison to Hold On There Youngster, and it kind of follows on from the kind of things that they was playing about in We Are Beautiful Now We Are Doomed, and I think they hit the sweet spot here, where they've got a mixture of emo mythology. No, what's the word? What's the word I'm trying to think of? They've got like the temperament of emo music, but have still got like the trappings of noise pop, indie pop, with that, but not being as twee to it. And I think it's a perfect balance of that sound. And also, I think because I think I'm the same age as the band, give or take perhaps one or two like academic years of school, older or younger. I think they're like slightly younger than me by about a year, I think, or some of them might have been in the same year at school as me, or perhaps below. So I'm kind of growing up with them. So as they kind of started maturing and they started talking about issues to do with like early to mid 20s, I was kind of relating to that. And it was like one of the first albums I feel like I was really kind of hitting or reacting to. And I think that's why I perhaps have like never let go of how much this album like means a lot to me. So I think that's probably why this album more than the others. Even though, I mean, this is like a top tier album. So anyone who's not listened to this before, I've got kind of like favorite albums and top tier favorite albums. There's only about 19 or like 19, perhaps 20 albums I would say are my top tier favorite all time. Los Campesinos, this one's number one. This is the number one top tier album for me. But they've also got Hold On There Youngster, which is in there as well. But I think that kind of hitting at the same time is why it's never just like never let go from me. So
yeah, this band, this let me go into some of the facts for it. This band formed in 2006 as they were attending Cardiff University. The members of the band, there's about 7-ish of them.
there's always been, at one point there was 8, but seven's always been the sweet number, because they've had people come in and out. I think there's only about 3 members who was there at the very beginning that's left. But yeah, 7's always been the number.
Yeah, they're so it's one of those bands where there's a bunch of people on stage and there's a bunch of people doing stuff, and it's sort of with that many people, there's going to be an energy there that you just can't help but get sucked into because of it. They have sort of adopted all the surname Campesinos, sort of like the Ramones. So the main people in the band, Gareth and Tom.
Yeah. Tom is the musical.
Yeah.
Is the musical director. He pretty much all the sound comes from him in the first instance. Yeah,
and then everybody else in the band adds music and does all that. This album, for people who may not be aware of this band, strap yourselves in, because you're gonna listen to this and be like, okay, I'm gonna have to listen to everything else that they've done, because this is just fantastic. It is a very like you said, the sort of, I think, vulnerable tweeness, I guess, that was popular sort of around the time in indie music and stuff, and emo as well. I think they have a shirt or something like that says like the UK's only emo band, or the first emo band, something like that. I think I've seen. That is the perfect way to describe them, because when I first heard them, I didn't hear them until their 5th album, No Blues.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it was either Pitchfork or Stereo Gum had a thing where they were like playing albums like a week or two before the album actually came out. And so this was up there, and I had heard about the band because of a comic book, because I'm that nerdy, and written and drawn by Jamie McKelvey and Kieran Gillen, called Phonogram. There's one particular issue. It's about how people are using music to cast magic spells and stuff. And it sort of takes place in this time and everything like that. It was coming out contemporarily with, this music coming out and everything like that. And there's 2 characters talking to each other, and one isn't really getting his magic to work right or something like that. And so like the older kind of guy who's been in the music scene and everything like that, who's a real good magician and stuff, he comes up to him, he's trying to help him out. He says, what are you listening to right now? He says, Dexys. It's like, Dexys, and it's like, Dexys Projected Passion Review, Dexys Young Soul Rebels, Dexys. Okay, I get the idea. Listen, I was listening to a band from Cardiff, big group, layered pop sound, no actual singles out yet, but you should listen to them. Look up Los Campesinos online. They're going to be big. Actually, scratch that. They're going to be big. Or they're never going to be big, but they're going to be big to some people. And I really got to dance before Kid gets thrown out. Pleasure meeting you. And they were saying like, you got to listen to, what was that song?
Yumi Dancing.
Yes, Yumi Dancing, which I think was off their first album. I think it's the last track on that one, or
no,
it's near the end.
Yeah, it's near the end. I think it's track 9, I think, because it ends with Sweet Dreams. Then you
that was the one that they were saying is like, okay, yeah, listen to this and it'll, change your life or something like that. You'll get really into the band. And so like I knew the name, and when the website or whatever to listen to this album before it came out showed up, I was like, oh, okay, let me give this a try. And I listened to it, and it's just like, okay, yeah, this is what he was talking about. Go back and try to listen to it all and everything like that. It is a very sort of emo and vulnerable. I first thought like if you were into My Chemical Romance, as probably the closest band I could think of, just because of how big it sounds and the sort of lyrical gymnastics that that Gareth sings in these songs. And I believe this was after the second vocalist, Alexandra, had left the band, but her in it also weaving in lyrical counterpoint in it, sort of similar to Slater-Kinney is what I think, and everything like that. Or also, some Broadway musicals where one person will sing one section of a song and another person will sing another section of a song at the exact same time, and you can't pay attention to any of them, so you have to listen to it over and over again. It's like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this one, and then I'm going to pay attention to this one. And both sets of lyrics add to the story that is being told in the song. The songs are very sort of telling stories. They're pastiches, snapshots of just sort of life and young life, I think, especially with this album at the time. Gareth describes this album. He says it's about the death and decay of the human body, sex, lost love, mental breakdown, football, and ultimately that there probably isn't a light at the end of the tunnel.
This is the way that's phrased. You're going to get a bunch of people in there messaging me saying, "Are you okay, Matt? You've been listening to this album for like 12 years. Are you okay?"
Yeah,
yeah.
This album has a lot of death in it, and people, it is very over dramatic in that sort of way of the way that you feel that when you're young and you're in love and everything like that, and it's just sort of like it's a razor's edge of, if I don't get to be with this person, then I'm gonna die. And it captures, I think, that feeling. And there's a lot of also sex in this album, which I think for I don't know, it's something that I didn't really hear. You don't really hear much of in sort of the way that they sing about it, unless it's misogynistic or gross in sort of like the rock genre. But then it is more sort of not necessarily what's the word I'm looking for, glossed over, just built up, sort of romanticized. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Like, romance is boring. I should have figured that out. Sort of romanticized in other sort of like maybe pop or R&B sort of songs. It is sort of like, you're young, you're going to mess things up. You're going to kind of experiment and see like how that fits into your life as somebody who is growing up and is no longer a child and has to fit this into a part of your life. And it should be healthy because it is a normal part of life and not something that you should be ashamed of or something like that, which of course living in any sort of repressive background, or if you grew up religious or something like that, you're bound to have feelings and sort of hang-ups about.
So I think particularly as well with this album, I think as you said, it's kind of like that exploration of it's less love, it's more kind of unknowing lust. I think I've seen Gareth mention it's mainly sex, death, and football, or soccer.
Yeah.
If anyone's listening, for the soccer form of football, for any Americans listening. I think Gareth even refers to it as soccer just to piss people off. I think he does refer to it as soccer. I think that's mainly to try and piss people off. He keeps saying it's football, even though soccer technically is the earlier term. But I think, as you're saying as well, I think what this is, it covers an arc of the genesis and the end and the reaction of people moving on from kind of like a destined to fail relationship. But what I think's interesting is that there's a lot of self-deprecation and almost self-awareness throughout the album that it perhaps was never going to work out. And a lot of the songs, which I think a lot of them are potentially autobiographical or semi-autobiographical. There's a lot of kind of a unique viewpoint that's given a very... I don't want to say nihilist, because I don't know whether it's exactly nihilist, but there's a very kind of pessimistic outlook throughout the whole album that like it feels like it was destined to not work. And there's a lot of kind of like different layers of foibles that happen for this. So by the time you start, like the first good chunk of the album is about this, the build up and genesis of this relationship, and then like the last like third of it is pretty much the end and the post kind of reaction to this like romance that I don't think the narrators was aware it was supposed to be a romance in the first place. And I quite like how kind of almost like realistic that is when you, in comparison to perhaps the more romanticized, to use that word again, views of relationships that can happen in other albums. And I quite like just how kind of direct and almost realistic that this can feel at times.
Yeah, it's, you know, there are relationships that people get into where it's sort of like, it's not gonna work out in the long run, but you want to see where it goes, and you want to have that experience, and cutting yourself off from those experiences keeps you from growing as a person. And, you know, if you're, this I think is the perfect sort of, this particular album is probably the perfect to listen to, like probably at your age, you know, the age that they are when they're making it, of, you know, being in university and sort of figuring out the sort of, I'm still in school, and, you know, kids go to school, but, you know, I'm a grown up because I get to do this grown up stuff like drink and, you know, have sex and do all this sort of stuff that, you know, grown ups do. But it is a very sort of liminal space of finding out who you are in the world, and finding out how you feel about things, and how you relate to other people and all that other stuff, because that is how you're going to exist in the world. You have to know how you're going to react to certain situations. You have to know how certain situations are going to affect you in order to be an adult. You know, when you're a kid, something happens to you and it's like, this is the end of the world. I don't know what I'm going to do. Oh my gosh. Or if you happen to have certain anxiety disorders or something, you're still going to think that way, as long as that's untreated and stuff. And, you know, and growing up, you get older, and, you know, you'll look at kids who will, I just went to a concert this week, to also see, to, I guess, get into the mood of this, another, Welsh band, the Joy Formidable. They came to town, and, saw them, and there were tons of kids, younger people there. And I was like, what the hell is going on? It was probably the main band. They were only one of the supporting acts. The Front Bottoms were the main band, and people were just in line and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, the only people like my age that I saw there were there with their kids. They had like teenagers that were there. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so old. But hopefully, you know, they see the Joy Formidable and they're like, oh yeah, I gotta, listen to this band and stuff like that. They're real good. Side note, a little tangent there for maybe a bonus thing for people listening to this. If you want to listen to some good ass rock music, Joy Formidable, good stuff. Listen to their first couple albums. Anyway, I kind of eavesdropping on some of these kids and stuff like that, and it's, they're kind of flirting-ish with each other, but not wanting to really let their real feelings show because, if you get rejected, it's going to be the end of the world and it's going to be horrible and everything like that. And if, and sort of trying on different personalities around people and stuff like that. It's like, oh, what if I was kind of outgoing and laughing at other people's jokes all the time and stuff like that? And, it's like, oh, what if I'm trying to be real cool and, aloof and all this other sort of stuff? And, when you're growing up and you're a teenager and your hormones are changing and your bodies are changing, you're sort of like, well, I'm changing, so maybe I can be a different person than I was when I was a kid. And you ultimately have to be a different person, and because you're going to be an adult. And if you're not a different person, then, you're going to be eating only macaroni and cheese and chicken nuggets for the rest of your life, and never clean up your room or do the adult things that you kind of have to do to live in the world.
Yeah, I think one of the things that this album catches on the kind of maturity aspects. I generally think as well that one of the last things I think you learn, or at least think me, well, perhaps for me or something, is I think the understanding that everyone else is also 3-dimensional rather than just 2D. Yeah. I think around this time or slightly after, particularly to my late mid-20s, I think it kind of hit, like, after being an absolutely moody, solemn teenager who, if I went back in time, I would slap some sense into. Yeah, if past me is listening to this, if 16-year-old Matt's listening to this and I ever get the chance to meet him, I would just slap him. But I think one of the things that I think you learn is that you're not the only person that's going through shit. You're not the only person that's got complex feelings. And I think that's one of the, I'm not sure about other people, but definitely for me, one of the last things I think I learned, and I think is one of the key things you learn as you find some semblance of maturity, is that other people have got their own stuff to get onto, and the world doesn't revolve around any singular person. So you build up kind of like a personalized mythology in your head, which is the most important thing ever. But then everyone else around you is just doesn't care. And I think this album has a kind of an aspect of this where you've got references or hints that the world around, like the narrator or the subjects of these songs, right, are taking things a lot less seriously than perhaps the narrator is. And I quite like the fact that as the album kind of goes through, it's only until the very serious necessity when other people have to get involved, or people have to come in and say, okay, you're what's happening now is starting to affect people negatively and stuff. You need to learn something. And I think this is another key aspect of that is in this album. And I think that's this album hits at that point where you have to kind of realize that you're no longer a teenager, you're no longer a child. And there's that kind of period in the early 20s where you don't realize that you have to kind of learn some maturity. And I think this album nestles in that sweet spot as well. And I think that's particularly towards the end of the album, that kind of realization is a key factor, I think, in one of the last stages of maturing in terms of, or gaining that perspective. And I think this album kind of also has that to it as well.
Yeah. Your actions have consequences.
Yes.
And not just to yourself, but also to the other people that you're connected to. And that's one of the things about finding and making connections with other people, is that you are going to affect each other. And I think that's what you want. And it's a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. So you have to pay attention to what you do that are going to affect the other people. We'll probably come up as we get to the song at the end. I think that it's sort of representative of that. The line, "Never kiss a Tory boy." So that this kind of fits into that. But that's a little bit too early on. Should we go through some of the tracks in this album to see?
Yeah,
I don't know. Is it like tracks that you think that people should listen to, or like as we go on through the album, or sort of like what you think about these tracks as we kind of go on, or?
I think as we start, I think if we're going to focus on specific songs, I think what I quite like to do is save tracks, the 10 to 15, to talk about last as a whole, and then go through them in sequential order. So I won't touch them yet. But I think in terms of the actual some of the songs on the first bit of the album, some of the ones that jump out to me, I think, are the title track, the opening track, at least. I've got a soft spot for Plan A, Straight In at 101. Those are the ones that jump out to me, like the most of that first bit. I think if anyone's not listened to this before and you want to hear a track, I think Romance is Boring is probably your entry point into the album. If you want to start with the title track, I think mainly as well, what's quite interesting is this song's actually now, I think, their highest stream song on Spotify, and I think a lot of that is due to a quite famous Twitch streamer being a fan of the band and performing this song on Twitch streams. And I think the band, the streamer's called Will Bussett, and he's got a band called Lovejoy, and they've just recently did a cover of Knee Deep at ATP from the first album, and I think their kind of love has reached a new generation of fans who are going, oh, let's listen to the original version of this song, and they're listening to Romance is Boring. And I think as an entry point, I think that's a good way to get an idea of what the band sounds like at this point in their kind of discography. And then if you're into that, then start from the start. It's only track 3, so you've got in media res to go through, but I think a good advert for the album is the title track.
Yeah, this album had a total of 3 singles for it. The Sea is a Good Place to Think of the Future. There are Listed Buildings. Both of those were released before the album came out, and then after the album came out, the final single was Romance is Boring.
There are Listed Buildings. I remember when that first came out, because like the buzz on the social media and Twitter, because you get your own kind of like almost bubble of people. So there's a bunch of people that I follow who are either listening to kind of the album before it came out or when this came out, and the big thing that people were listening to when there were Listed Buildings coming out was there's brass. There are trumpets. There are brass instruments. Los Campesinos have trumpets on their album. They have brass instruments because they didn't have that in the first 2. So like, yeah, and you'll have the brass suddenly kick in, and people were like, "What the hell?" So I remember when that first came out.
And also for people who may be unaware of this band, if you watch the movie Mitchells versus the Machines, Death to Los Campesinos, I think is the first song you hear in it as the movie opens or something like that. Or the first like action set piece, like that song like comes through, and I heard it. It's like, oh whoa, this is wow, cool. I think it's when the title shows up at the start as well. I think you hear the da 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 kicks in.
So I remember. I remember a lot of people saying, I watched it a bit later on because I didn't have Netflix when it first came out, but a bunch of people were like saying, oh my god, there's at least 2 Los Campesinos tracks on this. And there's quite a few kind of interesting bits on that. But so if anyone likes that song that appeared at the start of Mitchell's vs. the Machines. But yeah, there are Listed Buildings, I think, was like, I remember being kind of like surprised that when that came out first. And I think retrospectively, I think the band kind of regrets doing this first because it's not one of the more well-known songs, and they don't really play that live anymore. So I think they kind of said that they kind of wish they picked another song to go as a lead single. But I still like it. I mean, I still liked it. I think the title track probably should have been the first single, but
yeah, it is. This is probably, as you're listening to the album, if you're going through and everything like that, like when this song comes on and kind of like, okay, yeah, I know, like this is what is representative and sort of like what the album is trying to do, and you can kind of see how this, song is the title of the album.
yeah, I think the advertisement of what to expect. There's the over melodramatic metaphors being used. There's the kind of self-deprecating kind of views on romance. There's the interplay between Gareth and Alex that goes through. There's the kind of like building of tensions and the inevitable crescendo of noise. It's quite restrained in comparison to what happens a bit later on in the album, but yeah, and again, the example of perhaps one of my main reasons I love this band, which is Gareth's lyrical skill. I mean, he's not the best.
Mm-hmm.
He's not the best singer, and a lot of the times he kind of shouts and talks rather than sings. I think his voice has improved in later albums for singing, but
yeah,
here I think I just this is like one of the examples of some of his of just how kind of good he is at kind of twisting, just doing a little twist with his lyrics. So my kind of like love of lyrics kind of kick-started with Gareth. Like there are things I could do if I was half prepared to prove to each other that romance is boring. So that section in the chorus, I mean, people are saying that, oh, you've got to work at romance, you've got to work at a partnership. But the way that it's phrased in the chorus is that Gareth can't even be asked to even prove that romance is crap anyway. So I quite like how he's kind of like resigned to that in the chorus.
Yeah, I think he's sort of said like, it's like, oh yeah, so why is romance boring? And he said, it's not. It's boring the same way that I say iPads are shit because I want an iPad, but I can't afford one. Sort of the things that you want, and it is a very, I think, sort of like young person thing to be sort of like, oh, I want that person, but I can't have them, so I'm going to be crappy to them. Sort of, oh, I wish I could, be famous like that one person, but I can't, so I'll go ahead and hate on that person.
Yeah, and I think there are examples of kind of things because he'll blatantly reference other artists as well as kind of mess around with kind of wordplay. There's a good chunk in the second verse of this. I will bake phallic cake, take your diffidence, make it my clubhouse, but my strength within lies, ventricle cauterized, is the way of living that I espouse. Again, he kind of plays with rhyming with kind of words you wouldn't usually find rhyming in songs, but like the bake phallic cake is from a song called I Love You But You're Boring by The Beautiful South, who is, if anyone's not familiar with The Beautiful South, one of the creative leads is a guy called Paul Heaton, who was also in the House Martins, and I think, and I'm pretty sure Gareth is slowly morphing into a new generation of Paul Heaton. I think Paul Heaton and Jackie Abbott, who were in I think Jackie Abbott was a member of the Beautiful South at the time. They've toured together, and I think Gareth has actually guest appeared on a couple of times with Paul Heaton. And I always keep meaning to check out more House Martin stuff, because from what I've heard, there is a very strong influence on Paul Heaton with Gareth, and I always need to sit down and just listen to a whole bunch of Paul Heaton related stuff, just to. Because I've got a feeling I probably will get into it. But what I have heard, there's a lot of strong stuff on that. But it's an example of how Gareth kind of like almost pays tribute to the people, to his influences throughout with that song.
Yeah, it is. If you're listening to these songs, it is sort of easy to, I think, understand the lyrics in it. It's if it's easy, has an English accent, but I mean, it's because he's usually kind of more talking than like sort of singing. But it does really hit home. You can absorb it a lot more if you're reading through the lyrics as you're listening to the songs, and I think it does a really good it does the song service to do that as you're listening to the songs, just to get the sort of wide scope of what these songs are, and what he's trying to say in them. I think also, if you're something that could have been another single, I think, is Straight In at 101, which is if you like rock music, and that's sort of where you're coming at this from. This, I think, is one of the more rock songs that is a little less poppy, a little less twee, as people call it, I think, for songs on the album.
It's one of my favourites as well, actually. But I think, but it's part of an extended metaphor that I think like Gareth likes to play with in some songs. In just basically highlighting how naff and self-deprecating things can be. The idea of Straight In at 101. At the very end of that song, it talks about like one of these like top 100 breakups of all time. Now, I don't know if you get many of them in the US, but in the UK, we had like an epidemic of very cheap to make kind of shows, like the 100 greatest funny moments of TV, or the 100 greatest TV characters, or the 100 greatest moments in sketch, or the 100 greatest moments in documentaries in British history, where basically they'll just grab a load of archive footage and play it, and you'll get kind of D-list celebrities who just turn up, like who you haven't seen in about 10 years, who used to play a character in a sitcom, going, oh yeah, I remember watching this bit when that happened, and they'll just edit them in. It's like seen as kind of like one of the cheapest kind of TV like forms of TV you can make, where they'll just it's there to fill air.
Yeah, I think there was a point in time where I think it was like Best Week Ever was the show that we had with some stand-up comics and stuff like that, and talking about the news in a funny way, trying to be like, oh yeah, and then George Bush said that they were weapons of mass destruction, trying to make jokes about things. It's like, oh no, this is this is not going good.
And it's just like thrown in with like people don't give much thought into it, apart from like towards the end, you thinking like where some people think, oh yeah, Del Boy falling through the bar in Only Fools and Horses is like really funny, so that's number one, and all the other stuff up to that is like things you've forgotten about, and it's people, oh, isn't it really funny when that character did that thing that people still remember him for? And yeah, it's like kind of really kind of trite and stuff, and the kind of joke and the point being made, linking to what I said before, is that the breakup, like the breakup that the narrator of the song and his partner had was that inconsequential that it just goes in underneath. It's not even considered to be in the top 100 kind of like moments that like this kind of like that researchers have even bothered to look into. So it doesn't even register on that level, which I think harks back to my point I was making, where where people kind of mythologize their own kind of moments in life, but then the impact of it is hardly there. So it hardly makes a dent in history, hardly makes a dent in anything. So, and I quite like how kind of Gareth's taken that kind of cultural trope and just basically highlighted how insignificant it is in the overall scheme of things by saying it's not even going to be mentioned by a couple of people who played two characters in the background of The Office for one episode. They're not even going to talk about it. So why should you even like put much faith into it? And I just love how that metaphor is used for that, and just to show how, and it just adds to the self-deprecating nature of Gareth's lyrics. And the nature of how Los Campesinos approach the songwriting. I just love that kind of metaphor. I also quite like, this also kind of ticks a lot of boxes to me, because I'm a massive fan of kind of lyrically dense songs. And I think this might be the most lyrically dense song, because it is just basically verses, a break, there's a attempt at a chorus, more verse. And then to the point where, and I quite like the idea that like, and this is obviously deliberate, that Gareth is still trying to fit so much in that the band have stopped playing to try and shut him up, but he still goes on for another 20 seconds on this great last on this great point in a cappella, which talks about the. It goes, I found my friends and family to gather around the television. The talking heads count down the most heart-wrenching breakups of all time. Imagine the great sense of waste, the indignity, the embarrassment, when not a single one of that whole century was mine. Linking back to the thing I was just talking about, but the fact that appears a cappella after this crescendo of noise is finished, I think highlights that thing to the point where you're kind of thinking that, like, can we just shut him up, but he's still carrying on? And that links back to that whole thing where it's someone that's self-involved to try and self-involved about this thing but no one else cares. And I just love how much layers there is in that.
Yeah, I think like the song goes through and is sort of, it's a sort of disillusion of this relationship, and it's sort of like he's saying to the woman, just kind of like, you'll get over it or something like that, basically, sort of pretty much. And, I think then that she finds someone else, I think at the end of the song when he says, I condescend a smile and wink directly at the camera. I leave you lead in both our sense as I tiptoe at the back door. And sort of like, I think he's sort of like leaving as they're both there, and he's sort of like, I don't know if there's like a CCTV cameras that he's, smiling and winking to, or if it's just sort of like a sort of office-esque sort of, like, I'm the center of all attention, so I'm, smile and wink is kind of, oh, that's me, and so I'm going to gather all my friends and family, around the television and stuff, and, they're going to see that this breakup was so awesome that it made, the headlines and everything like that. And, it doesn't. And I think like when the music stops, it's sort of like when the TV show has ended and everybody's just kind of like, okay, well, all right, let's keep going on with your lives. And you're thinking to yourself after everybody's sort of leaving, it's kind of like, oh, what? It's not there. And I think the music stopping there sort of signifies that. And I think it is very sort of representative of things in your life, especially when you're young, happening, seem like the biggest things in the world. And then you get older and you get some perspective and you're kind of like, that was a big deal at the time, but in the grand scheme of things, I moved on and, I grew, hopefully, and, I don't even think about it anymore. It's not a big deal. It kind of happened and, well, whatever. I'm in a better place now, so.
Yeah, I think, although I think the better place doesn't happen for the narrators of these songs until
yeah, I don't think it happens in this album at all.
Yeah. No, it doesn't happen in this album whatsoever. But we'll get into that. But I think that kind of like helps start leading to the last third of the album. But I think before we start talking about those songs, because I feel we have to give some time to a couple of those on there. Before we move on, can we just briefly mention the intro, the first song? In Media Res, which
because I think this doesn't have a chorus at all. I think in it, it's all just it's all just lyrics. It's all just verse. It's all
But I think it also starts with the most deliberately kind of opposing lyric in comparison for the rest of the album, because it builds in with this very nice kind of glockenspiel, kind of like slow builds, which kind of harks towards the kind of twee beginnings of at least the first album and some of the second at least as well. And then Gareth comes in and says, let's talk about you for a minute. And then suddenly the rest of the album is about himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love how deliberate that is. I mean, the opening line for We Are Beautiful, We Are Doomed is, I think it's safe to say that we chose hopelessness and inflicted it on the rest of us, which is a reference to a lyric in My Year in Lists, the song I was talking about earlier as well. So there's a lot of deliberate choice for the introductions of the songs and stuff. And I just love the fact that he's just gone, yeah, let's talk about you for a minute. And then doesn't for the next 50 minutes. But again, it's not, Media Res it will not work for a single at all, but for an opening for an album, particularly that's got like almost like not exactly a concept album, but has like an arc through it. I absolutely love this. it's got a very pessimistic, almost not fully matured adult look at things they used to do as children. There's a game that people used to play where they'll like, or like playground games, or where like you'll drop an orange peel, and then if it was in the shape of a letter, you'll go, oh, you're going to marry someone with the initial H, which is like, yeah, and and Gareth then takes that and then creates this very kind of almost dark imagery of him. Oh, if I die, just throw me into a plane and do the same thing for me with my body, and just sprawl my body onto the ground, and then just look at the initial where it ends. There's just something very kind of dark about that, which I really quite, which worryingly I quite like.
It is sort of also, I think, I think especially for some men when you're young, to sort of be, I guess, violent or abusive in your overdramaticness of things. Just sort of like, well, if, giving yourself, thinking that you're being so romantic, so devoted that you're like, well, without you, I'm going to die. And so if you don't have me, I'm going to harm myself in some way or something like that. And it's going to be your fault because you don't love me. And I think that, big emotions can lead you that way. But I think it's also it is something that's, I don't know about encouraged, but it's something that is sort of in the culture, I think, of maleness and stuff, of just sort of bringing everything back to violence and not respecting women and their autonomy. And, sometimes things don't work out. And if you're going to be this much of, in your parlance, arse, then, maybe you shouldn't be together, because that's no way to love and respect a person, is to hold them hostage with your own feelings.
I don't read that song that way. I think it's more of a case that I don't think it's more a case it's a description of kind of that kind of abuse or anything like that. I think it's more a case that Gareth as narrator is saying that, okay, I am that so inconsequential.
Yeah.
As I was that inconsequential to you as a partner. Once, if I'm gone, you're not going to miss me. So just fling me off an airplane. I think it's more of the self-deprecating way of saying, okay, if I'm not that, I'm not that major. I'm not the kind of cornerstone in your life or anything. So yeah, just chuck me out of an airplane. I think it's more.
Yeah, I don't think that it was meant as that dark, or it was sort of, that was the intention. Yeah. But I think that you could kind of see somebody else saying that and meaning it in a different way. I think that there's just like a sort of connection to those sorts of thoughts and feelings and stuff like that. And I think personally too, sort of, you can joke and kind of say those things and think those things and everything like that. But when you sort of say them and everything, it sort of gives validity to those types of feelings and stuff. Sort of like, if making jokes about people with developmental disabilities or something like that, it's sort of like, it's not serious. I don't think that, those people are, there's anything wrong with them or anything like that. I'm just making a joke. And it's sort of like, okay, well, you're saying that enough to where people think that, okay, well, if it's okay to joke about them, then they are lesser people, and it is okay to think of them that way and stuff. And that's just sort of, I guess, the American left coast wokeness that I'm sort of guilty of or whatever. But I don't know. But I think, in this song, it is more poetic and sort of just making an illustrative point, like you're saying, of that's really sort of what it's in reference to. But, me kind of making connections and seeing different things and everything like that. If you listen to my podcast, we'll plug at the end. I guess it's just all about making connections and thinking about things in just different ways and stuff.
Yeah. And I think there's also an element of gallows humor. I think as well. There's a very dark sense of humor. I think throughout all this. So as much as we are talking about this kind of like throwing people out of the body, there's the
nobody's really going to do that at all.
No,
but
the self-deprecating nature. I think, and again, I think a lot of my marketing brand. If anyone follows me, the Pick a Disc account on Twitter, there's a lot of self-deprecate. There's a lot of almost too self-deprecating. Self-deprecation is like a brand for me, and I think people listening to this album will probably understand suddenly a lot of the kind of humorous tone. A lot of the self-deprecation happens through this, but there's a lot of gallows humor in this. I mean, I've never gone that dark on the Twitter, but the self-deprecation is like overly melodramatic to the point that you have to kind of laugh at it. But it's also making a very kind of almost serious point at the same time, which I do quite appreciate.
It's also could be something when you're younger, sort of feeling like, if I am self-deprecating with somebody that I'm romantically interested in or something like that, they'll have no choice but to then compliment me. It's like, oh, no, you're okay. It's not that bad and everything like that. I remember a time when I was in high school and a group of friends, we were somewhere kind of eating and chatting and stuff like that. And there was a girl I had a crush on, and everybody, and she was kind of like describing her type of guy that she was into or something like that. And, of course I'm listening to it and sort of like, it's like, okay, that's not me. So it's like, this totally isn't going to happen or something like that. And everybody was kind of going around in a circle, and then it got to me. And so, they says, oh, Brandon, what's your type of girl? And I said, just one word, breathing, as sort of self-deprecating. And, you may think it's funny, and you may think that it's sort of an opening for somebody to be like, oh, no, you're okay. It's people like you and all this other stuff. But women will tell you all the time, it's like, that's not good. People aren't, interested in that. That doesn't attract people when you're like, oh, I'm such a loser. I'm not funny. Nobody likes me. Anybody gonna, give me some crumbs and tell me that that's not true? And they're like, no, okay, well, I'm not gonna take that bait, because if you don't think of yourself as worthy of having attention, then I'm not gonna give you attention, because you're not gonna accept it, and B, like, well, you just told me that you're not, so I'm not gonna give it to you.
No, yeah, I think some other songs on the album kind of cover that as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about Plan A.
Yeah, Plan A. I don't want to spend too much on this, but I kind of love just how manic it is. It's the kind of loud, almost the parts of early Los Campesinos that are influenced by kind of Riot Girl and like the Kathleen Hanna. I mean, because they cover quite a few Riot Girl tracks in their early EPs and stuff. I think this is kind of like a nice, lovingly kind of in tribute to that. But I also love just how much of the joke it is. And the story, and it's very much a storyline song. So it just basically says that, oh yeah, we'll move to Malta.
Malta.
Yeah, we'll say that we're Maltese. We'll get really good at football. We'll win the World Cup. And then because it's never happened before, they'll make us royalty just because of the prowess. And you'll be by my side, and you'll be the Queen of Malta. You'll be on the coins and stuff. We'll just rule Malta as royalty. And I quite like the story of basically talking about that. Gareth was saying, oh, when there was in sixth form, or like I think the equivalent of junior or senior year in the US at like 17 or 18, they were just sitting around saying, yeah, you know what, plans, yeah, let's go and become footballers and play for Malta and just basically become the best Maltese footballers ever. Finding that, Plan B, we'll start a band. Which is why it's called Plan A, and I just love that kind of the storytelling of that. Yeah, but I kind of love it's it doesn't feel like it contributes to like the overall arc of the rest of the album, but sonically it's a nice part that follows from the song before it leads into the slow intro to Straight In at 101. But yeah, I've always got a soft spot for Plan A.
Yeah, and really, how many songs are there about footy out there? So I mean,
I think Los Campesinos is pretty much like particularly with like songs from the other albums, that they are very much the songs about football. they incorporate so many more football references in stuff. I mean, Tony Cascarino was referenced in the previous album. So
I think the closest that Americans will come to is like maybe they'll sing about a football game or something like that in a country song. And there was the band Explosions in the Sky did the soundtrack for Friday Night Lights. I think is the closest you can get.
I think there's always basketball players referenced in rap songs. I think.
Pearl Jam has some basketball songs too. So that's.
I've lost count to how many times. I think Nelly sung about Michael Jordan so many times. I can't believe it's But yeah, I just needed to briefly mention Plan A before we move on.
Okay, so then we're if you have the record and you're flipping the second disc then, and you're getting in there at the end, where the album does sort of, I think, get definitely darker at this point.
Yeah, from like track 9 onwards, but then from track 10 to 15 is like my favourite bit. The songs get more kind of emo-ish, so like you've got your kind of almost Fall Out Boy / Panic at the Disco esque, like, crap, are we going to have enough space to write these song titles?
There's one thing that can kind of turn people off, I think, is if you look at the names of the songs, and it is sort of like okay, I get it, you are smart, or like I don't know, it's just sort of like you can cut down these song titles just a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of self-awareness from them as well. I think on Genius, I think on one of them he goes, "What a stupid title." And that's
yes.
We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, from Heartwells onwards, this is my favourite sequence of music from any album ever. So we're here. So what you're about to listen to now is me talking about some of my favourite songs on my favourite album. This is the part that I've been waiting 4 years to talk about. Yeah, these are the songs. 4 years I've been waiting to talk about these.
So let's hear it. Let's see what you got.
So yeah,
no pressure.
Yeah, you're the one hosting, Branden. So you're the one who should be feeling the pressure.
See, a good host lets the guest talk. See, that's
I'm learning something now. You're teaching me stuff about being a host.
100 episodes in, you're always learning.
Yeah, I'm always learning. Heartwells is the very small kind of leading to I Just Sighed. But I think this is the part where the songs start being about the breakup and the aftermath of the kind of relationship that's been built on the first bit. And it starts in with this very kind of very softly spoken, almost haunting kind of 30-second bit where it goes, it's just the three of us, me, your shadow, your echo, and I do not believe I've ever felt any more alone. And that's just the only lyrics in it. And if that's a great kind of almost description of a post-breakup, particularly particularly if it's not you that did the breaking up, where, so at the moment it's you on your own, but then you've got the lingering memories or the shadow and the echo, particularly if you've been living with anyone, you've got like traces of people that you were with, and
mail still showing up at your place or something like that.
Yeah. And I do not believe that I've ever felt any more alone with him and the other two aspects. I think it's just a great, very direct, a very good kind of almost impactful description of a post breakup.
And I think in the next song, I just sighed, just so you know. I think that the lyric that from this that just always sort of bowls me over of it is just let me be the one that keeps track of the moles on your back. It's just something that's so intimate and also sort of everyday, sort of non-consequential, that it's just sort of an everyday, kind of almost gross sort of thing. But, in a long-term relationship, it is just a bunch of those, things. It's, it's kind of like, I don't want to ask somebody, if you're in the heat of passion and stuff like that and you're young and a relationship is new and exciting and everything, it's kind of like, am I really going to ask somebody how their day was every single day for the rest of my life? And it's just sort of like, how different could that be? And it's sort of like, no, life isn't always on the knife's edge of just passion and explosions and just the biggest, most important things in the world. It's also just living every day and being with somebody.
Yeah, it's the kind of dream of just having like someone that you're really comfortable with, that you past the honeymoon phase. But I think with that as well, perhaps with the song, is that you get the impression that, particularly with the narrator of the song, that perhaps not emotionally mature enough to get to that point.
Yeah.
Get to that point. And it's said that because of the viewpoints of the narrator that we've had, and the kind of like almost very kind of like stark. Again, I keep thinking nihilist, but I don't think it's nihilism. But I don't think it's nihilism, but he's got a very kind of unique viewpoint of relationships that goes through it. Like, particularly with just before that chorus, there's the bit where he kind of is like trying to keep his memory alive post his breakup. There are so many good lines in this, like the second verse as a whole. I'm not going to quote it all, but there's a bit where it says, like, I've displayed marriage proposals on the jumbotrons of ball games you've not been at, and I've written eulogies in guest books of galleries in the hope that you might pass. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, it's the kind of, if you go back to romance is boring, so it's like, if I was half prepared to prove that romance is boring, he's now trying to prove something else, but still half-arsing it. So it's still not fully in tune with what he should be doing, and kind of like, and you question whether he's doing it correctly. And I just kind of love that I just kind of love those images that he's conjuring in a very short amount of lines, which say so much. There's also the bridge as well, where it's like, she nervous barefoot chats to me at the front door, he boyfriend inside a state becoming a martyr, me rolling writhing on the floor, stared daggers pull from my thoracic wall. Which again, if we go to the fact that it's a bit too melodramatic, picture too melodramatic, where it's like someone saying, like, you're seeing an ex and their new partner is like around, and they're going, oh yeah, smiling, going, oh yeah, that's nice, yeah. Yeah, just like smiling through, going, I want to leave here right now, and I don't know how to just leave. There's that, again, that kind of overly melodramatic metaphor to just like describe something so mundane yet relatable. I love that. I just love that.
Yeah, I think there's also the part where he gave a gift of the Faber book of love poems, annotated the ones he thought applied the most. Not gonna wind you round with prose. If anyone should know, then it's I should know.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of like the thought of, well, he's not even writing these things. These aren't his thoughts. He's just taking something that somebody else already wrote, and it's a poem. A poem is easy. Anybody can write a poem, and just writing like, oh, this is us or something. And it's like, no, I'm gonna write you stories. I'm gonna write you novels. I'm gonna, invent worlds and characters and everything like that. But it can't be. I'm doing so much, but it's not enough. And
yeah, and that's there's a nice kind of backwards reference to a song we've not really talked about. There's We Got Your Back. There's a whole bridge that's repeated where it says, I've learnt more from toilet walls than I've learnt from these words of yours. Yeah, I think it like the idea being like with this and the song we're actually talking about. Like it's what he thinks he should be doing, rather than what he wants to be doing and stuff. And I just love that. Yeah, there's also a line with the kind of last bridge as well, where he talks about I'll pick up the phone book and choose the name that my eyes fall upon on their first look, and aim all of my poorly composed declarations there in the future. I am so sorry to have put you through a lifetime of dedications that you've never desired. I love that line. I love that whole section. I think that's really powerful.
Then we have probably the most sweaty uncomfortable of titles in this in on this album. I think that he's even said that sort of like, I think this is the one you're talking about where he says, okay, this title, no good. A heat rash in the shape of the show me state, semicolon, or letters from me to Charlotte.
I think it's often been just abbreviated to letters from me to Charlotte.
Yeah.
Because this is another one, because there's a bit of, because I think this was recorded, and I think he wrote, because the way that Gareth writes, he usually writes during the recording thing, so they'll go to a place for a month, and they'll record the album, and at the time, Gareth just starts writing the lyrics there and then, so he doesn't actually write beforehand, he just writes during the recording sessions, so that's why a lot of it's very... If you look at other albums, a lot of it is very at the time. Because I think Six Scenes was recorded in Portugal, which is why there's a lot of references to Spain and Portuguese football teams, and like a lot more of a Sunday disposition in some of the things. And I think this was recorded. I think this was recorded in Seattle. Let me just double check that.
Yeah, I think Seattle and somewhere else in the Midwest United States.
Because the producer that they've worked on for like the last 5 albums is John Goodmanson, who we've not really talked about, who's pretty much a very Seattle-based music like producer who's worked with quite a lot of kind of grunge and rock bands from the Seattle scene as well, like Bikini Kill, for example, and I think Slater Kinney, etc. But yeah, so this put like the kind of the Show Me State. Is like, I think it's one of the first times. I'm not sure what the Show Me State is.
It's Missouri.
Right. Okay. Because they've all got, I think all the states have got that kind of like, the so-and-so state, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Golden State, Aloha State, Empire State.
Yeah.
Nevada's the Silver State.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not % sure what the state, if that has an impact on the actual song itself, but the song, I think it's a great kind of exploration. What seems to be at first about kind of unrequited love between two, from what one person perceives to be platonic and the other one not, and then it kind of twists halfway through to being, okay, they're actually talking. The song's about two people discussing what appears to be two people in that kind of relationship, but then it kind of flips back and thinking, okay, so the song is about the narrator talking to Charlotte, and you're led to believe the song's about the narrator's feelings for Charlotte, but then it turns out that there are letters written by the narrator and Charlotte talking about another couple who are going through this thing. But is the song also about the narrator's feelings for Charlotte as well? I think it's a very great kind of almost layered exploration of that.
From the beginning, like the first verse, I kind of get the sense that Charlotte has a boyfriend who is possibly abusive, and her best friend that's a guy who of course has feelings for her, sort of being sort of, that's what the bruise sort of things, she'd a bruise so black they watched it fade through the full spectrum of colors. They kept it like a pet, a private joke they told no others. Sort of like, okay, we both know that this is happening to you, but I'm going to be a good friend and sort of be supportive of you and your relationship, and not tell you that you should leave him and go for me. As it gets into the other, into the next verse, they'd promised they'd be best of friends from now until forever, but both were far too needy to not fall for the other. And of course, and how frequent the public displays of sisterly affection. They left her feeling safe, left him with an erection.
Yeah, and it's like, and you're thinking, okay, is Gareth slightly starting to get more sentimental? Then, of course, throws in a knob gag.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, quite a lot of Los Campesinos songs can be argued they are just knob gags, more or less. But yeah, so I think that's an example of pretty much how it's almost very direct it's very direct in kind of just what he's talking about, almost like spur of the moment, stream of consciousness lyrics, and again kind of highlighting that kind of observation of these two people, which leads to, I think, a great chorus, which the imagery's always lasted with me, where it's like, walk out into your front lawn and face into the rain, shout into the wind, this will never be the same. And I think it's because it's Alex that sings that.
Yeah.
I think it adds kind of like a kind of like calming influence to try and calm kind of like the kind of the mania of Gareth down a touch. But I think it's also a description of the almost over melodramatic thing that can happen when kind of feelings are revealed, but then they're not kind of returned, and a current dynamic has changed forever because of like one person's feelings to the other. And I quite like the melodramatic, almost cinematic aspect of that's caused by this chorus, or couldn't.
Yes, and of course, you're going to, the reason that you would put your face into the rain was so that nobody could tell that you're crying. It's the rain.
I think one of my favourite parts of the song is the third verse, where it's very almost poetic, which is the whole, her body barely visible, as bleach white as the bed sheets, as stiff as starch, only perceptible as a middle bustle branded with a heat rash in the shape of the show me state. You'll come online, sound disastrous, noise more foreboding than volcano or earthquake, which doesn't actually have any annotations on Genius, but there's the way the music kind of slows and focuses on the lyrics. I just love how that kind of acts as a break from from what we've had before. And I just love how that sounds.
That leads into the one single. We got. Oh man, there's a lot of references, a lot of the stuff in here. Of the sea is a good place to think of the future.
I think this might be the band's most popular song. I think to Spotify, it's probably Romance is Boring, probably because of the streaming. I think because of the streamers. You Me Dancing, I think, is probably the most popular. Purely because I think it was the time when it was like the kind of indie pop bop. Around the time of the late noughties when they first started kicking off. It was also used in a Budweiser commercial in the US. I think it was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there are, if you Google Budweiser commercials, you will hear the kind of slow build of You Me Dancing, and then the dun 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 dun, so all kicking in. But I think critically, I've seen people who love this song. And it's not my favourite song on the album. Objectively, it might be the best song on the album. Subjectively, I don't think it's my favourite. But I've seen people who perhaps aren't particularly fans of Los Campesinos have to come back and say, okay, yeah, Sea's a good place to think of the future. Okay, yeah, that's a good song. And it is a masterpiece, I think. It's a masterpiece in British emo.
Yes, yeah, it is super emo, super heavy. It is, everything that you're thinking about,
yeah. It's
apologies for, content trigger warning, there's, self-harm, eating disorders, there's trauma, death of parents, it's just all over the place.
Yeah.
It is.
It's also like if you listen to this, if this is the first song that you hear of Los Campesinos, and then you go and then you go and thought, oh, okay, oh, I like this song, and then you think, you know what, I need to listen to more Los Campesinos. I've only heard this song, but I'll go and listen to the first album. You will think it's a different. Yeah, this is like the most un-Los Campesinos song. I mean, future albums kind of dip into kind of more like Hello Sadness is kind of very much influenced from the sound of this song. But yeah, this is so kind of un-Los Campesinos in comparison to the first album. There are elements of the second which you think, okay, yeah, the kind of heart swells from the second album is kind of like a nice kind of foreshadowing of this. But the storytelling, the very slow kind of methodical kind of guitar that goes through, the absolutely beautiful harmonies of like humming that appears as the verses build, as kind of, and as all these kind of elements of the instrumentation come in, and the kind of more seriousness of the lyrics come in, it's just, it's brilliant. It talks about kind of, Gareth tells a story of this kind of this girl. I don't know whether it's supposed to be the kind of like the person he's singing about, or whether it's fictional. I'm not 100% sure on that, but you get a very vivid picture of this person, and of like of kind of like the issues that she's dealing with, and issues that she's dealing with, or things that she's done in the past, like eating disorders, and like losing a mom, and why she's like taking so many different medications, everything in like a viewpoint, and like her ideas of what she might do to end her life and stuff. It's the way it's done. It's just really well done. And then you kick in with the chorus, and the chorus again. It's not manic at all, but it's the chorus thinking, okay, this sounds like a Los Campesinos, or it's the closest Los Campesinos have to a ballad, I think, and it's just beautiful. It's it's a beautiful song where the chorus describes someone drowning. I've just scrolled down, saw the chorus. I'm like, oh yeah, the chorus is actually about drowning. I'm like, this is a beautiful, beautiful song. And then basically saying, oh yeah, and your lud's full with water. I'm like, oh okay.
Yeah, like and as I mentioned before, this has the lyric, but you can never kiss a Tory boy without wanting to cut off your tongue again. About that particular line, Gareth said, the Conservative Party and anyone who votes for them is reprehensible. It is our duty to look out for and protect those of us less fortunate than ourselves, and challenge white nationalism head on wherever we find it.
That what's quite interesting as well is that they then marketed and created t-shirts with Never Kiss a Tory Boy, which had the then Prime Minister David Cameron in the throes of like mouth passion with a pig.
Yes.
Yeah. This was before what was called Piggate, where allegedly, David
Some
Cameron,
people have claimed.
Yeah. We are allegedly saying this. We are not. Where it was where he rumored to have participated in a act involving a pig's head as part of a ritual. So yeah. Also getting a resurgence alongside that and that shirt is the first episode of Black Mirror, for reasons that if you want to know, just Google it. But yeah, so that's got kind of weird. But the Never Kiss a Tory Boy as well, I think that's a very kind of pivotal line. I think it's very personable to Gareth. I can't remember which performance it was, but there was a point where he sung it and kind of reacted to it, and I think he, because the crowd sung it back to him very loudly, and it's the point where it's one of those lines where the whole crowd shouts back to him, and there's a point where I think he had a reaction to it, kind of like an emotional reaction to that line, and I remember a couple of friends of mine who were at that gig. I wasn't at that one. I just can't remember where it was. Saying, I think he actually had a moment during that line, and he actually tweeted about it, I think, afterwards, and like, oh yeah, he did. The mundanity of history and the world going around you, and whether you have an impact or not. The end of the chorus has the 500 years dead set ahead of me, 500 behind, 1,000 years in perfect symmetry. Just like that moment in there in time is the most important moment for you, but the world's still going around, which goes again to the point that I think the album's also trying to make, in that in the scheme of things, what's personal to you will not be as important to everyone else, or in the lines of history. Yeah, that song's great. And the kind of mundanity of life, I think Gareth also tries to just remind you that you are listening to a Los Campesinos track, and that realities of life are still apparent. And so yeah, so he's got this conjurable in the last half of the second verse, where it says, oh, you look at the feet in the water going behind you, there's a pier in front of you, you're looking at the looking at this like vast ocean in front of you. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, but then you look at the left side and the right side, and you've got crazy golf courses next to you. Yeah, basically the last line in that verse is either way is a crazy golf course, which, as I'm talking about it, feels like it's ruining a very a beautiful song, but in context to the band and the song and what it's trying to do, it's a really good ending. It's a really good off-kilter, unconventional way to end a song that's covering so many kind of almost dark subjects.
Then next we have This Is a Flag, There Is No Wind.
This is my favourite song on the album. This is my favourite song on the album. Yeah. I think, as I said earlier, objectively, I think the previous song is probably the best, but my favourite is this. And I just love how I've always quite a fan of albums where the penultimate song feels like the closing number, and then the last track is an epilogue. This album has that. And I just love how much of a whiplash turn this is from comparison to the Caesar's Place. To the point where the song has the whole band screaming, "Can we all please just calm the fuck down?" After a really, really good kind of build up of the intro, like a 30-second intro. But then the previous song that they're singing about, they're not. It's like the most sedate song they've ever done.
Well, it's also like, I think, huge emotionally, and sort of like, okay, hey, let's not get over dramatic. Okay, like this isn't what the album or the band is about. It's just sort of a piece. Let's calm down and you take a breath and realize that it's not that serious. It's not life ending. Yeah.
It's
all a metaphor.
Yeah. And then the song then proceeds to be about a very unhealthy relationship, which is yeah. But this is, I think, the song that kind of like is like a combination of all the things that they've been leading up to in terms of sounds throughout the three albums at this point. It's the last song canonically which features Alex, and so it's nice that there's the interplay between the two of them, because I'm always a fan of bands with more than one vocalist, and I love the fact that they're interplaying with each other and talking, and it feels like. See, I think if they can, I think that as much as I love this song, I think this might have been what people would be expecting the whole of a third album of Los Campesinos to sound like, because it sounds like a slightly mature version of the twee madness of the previous albums. But I quite like the fact they're kind of closing this chapter. Well, if you take a coda out of, if you take the next song out of Commission for a Second, this is kind of like their big finish. And I love the fact they're kind of building up to a massive crash of noise with a mixture of kind of like the dueling vocalists talking about kind of like a very unhealthy relationship, building up to a great chorus, which is like the most unpop-like chorus that which is very catchy, but is not catchy in terms of like a pop song at all. Talking about kind of like how much that a relationship that's been forming is now starting to impact everyone else. But then when people try to get involved, when any external forces try to help these people, they just like switch off. So like you have a whole album of people kind of being so melodramatic and being quite insular to the point of trying to get attention. But then when the attention's starting to be seen, they switch off.
Yeah.
So like the flag no wind, the chorus is like the story of the winter I forgot how to speak. My mind was like a nation's flag, but my breeze was too weak, which is just like the attention span is just like drifting away to the point where it's like perhaps hinting towards depression, and and it does it in a kind of very shouty, energetic way.
I think too with the album having Alex on here, weaving in parts of lyrics and everything like that, is also sort of possibly represents the very self-centeredness of the main character in this album and stuff like that. It's kind of like me, 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 me. It's all about how I feel and everything. And then the woman sort of coming in being like, hey, I'm here too. I'm a part of this relationship too. I mean, you're doing things and everything, but you know, I'm here too. I matter too. I'm a person too. And it's not all about you. It's, you know, I am not just a prize to be won. I'm not just a goal to have, you know, I'm a person and I'm here too. And I think that it gives a overall sort of sense of just how male centered and sort of male dominated society can be, and also, you know, relationships can be and everything like that. You know, men will expect everything from women, you know, but then it's sort of like, well, I don't really have to give that much to you. It's all about how I'm feeling and my emotions and everything, and you can just be tossed away and I'll, you know, find somebody else.
Yeah, and again, I think the sex, death, and football is summed up in this one as well. The first, the first quote, again, the kind of sense of humour is not lost. The first verse in between Alex and Gareth it says, in an analogy that makes sense to most, this opportunity found me unmarked at the far post, but I blazed it right against the crossbar of the pub that he'd worked in since he moved it from Bath Bar. He's throwing in football analogies. Throwing in football analogies that work in the context of kind of like relationships or making point and stuff. And on Twitter, I think Gareth marks the point. One of the easiest times to ever score a goal in football is being unmarked at the far post, and then blazing it against the crossbar. Like, that's me playing football. That's me playing football. Like, in order. Again, if anyone's not familiar with soccer, I'm not going to get too much into it, but like hitting and missing the football by going over the crossbar at that short distance is thoroughly embarrassing. But the analogy works so well. And another part of this is the second half of the second verse follows a great, I think, 50-second kind of instrumental break, which I think highlights kind of like the sound that you'd assume from Los Campesinos. It's just, it builds and builds and builds. You have kind of the violin, you get the glockenspiel come back. You have the kind of like a dark twee. I think it's the darkness of this album fighting with the tweeness of the first album, coming together and building up before it cuts off. You just hear the kind of like the tapping of the drumsticks, and then the second verse comes in. There's a great line where he goes, there are photos of us holding hands outside of the frame. I was there, but I wonder where our fingers were all the same. And there's a nice kind of musing on memory on that, which isn't that much explored in the rest of the album. But there's a kind of like hint towards the unreliable narrator, but trope, and he's questioning, and he's questioning, and he's like kind of like questioning. Hang on, I know it was there, but were they really? So like you got off shot, you've got someone holding hands, but as you look back on something, you're like, were they really there? Or another reading of it is saying, oh, the hands were holding, but perhaps I wasn't as invested in the relationship as possible. So whilst my hands are holding, my hands are probably thinking of something else. Or like if you're in a conversation and you're smiling, they're going nodding and nodding and nodding, but then you're thinking of something else, and someone asks you your opinion, and you're going, oh, and you're not really paying attention because your mind's somewhere else. I think that's another kind of like way of that being phrased.
Let's see, and as we end this album with what is it? Coda burn scar in the shape of the Sooner State. For just so you know, the Sooner State is Oklahoma. Which Missouri, Oklahoma, sort of diagonal southwest, northeast from each other.
Yeah. Okay.
Which, you know, I guess as they're sort of touring in the United States, sort of around that part of the country, sort of, I don't know, it probably doesn't mean anything, and you just like the way those things sound.
Yeah, I think I'm not 100% sure about the references to the States. Again, it's probably because he was writing and probably staring at a map of the US at some point. That's probably why. And he's like, crap, I need to finish this song before I start recording the lyrics in 10 minutes. But yeah, but I think this is kind of like the epilogue. I don't class it as an actual song, but it's a kind of quite dark way to end the album.
Yeah.
I think it's like a combination of the kind of like the psychological issues that the subject of the narrator's kind of romantic intentions kind of going through their own stuff. So it feels like a sequel to The Sea's Good Place. Good Place, and the impression I've always got is that it's the narrator of The Sea's Good Place learning that the girl he's singing about has ended her own life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the immediate reaction to it again.
Yeah.
So like, or it's the reaction of grief. And I've always assumed that it's him kind of like reacting to this person no longer being here and kind of questioning the relationship and decisions that they both made or that he made. So yeah, and to me it's him kind of like grief taking like an attack of grief during a shower. During a shower because and he talks about the first time, last time, times in between, all the times I would like there to have been. So like if you like, it's perhaps it's the more serious, it's the most kind of like serious ending to something, or the impression of. But like as something ends, you try and you replay all the key moments in a relationship, like saying the first time, the last time, and all the times in between, and the times I would like there to have been, and like all the regrets and stuff all hitting at once as grief overtakes, and it ends with kind of the tone, which I think is quite nice lead up into the next album, Hello Sadness, which is just bleakness throughout, with the refrain of "I can't believe you chose the mountains every time. I can't believe I chose the mountains every time you chose the sea." Where I think it's that kind of moment of maturity, as I was talking about earlier, of learning, okay, people have got their own kind of three-dimensional kind of goals and motives and I think you have to learn about them, or learn that people have them. And I think this is the narrator of this, and perhaps the rest of the album, learning that moment of, I can't believe that I wanted to do this when you wanted to do that, and we didn't realise that we were incompatible at the time. But now it's ended, and we can't do anything to fix that. And it's very dour. It's very, again, as Sam to see, this is very much unlike everything else that's on the album, apart from perhaps Heartswells and the kind of intermediate stuff. But it's a very impactful way to hammer home the points I think the album's been made.
Yeah, I think too that those lines sort of, for the most part, mountains are sort of inland, so it's sort of staying in a place, whereas if you're going to the sea, you're going to leave. You're trying to get out of somewhere, where it's kind of like, I wanted to stay and I wanted to do this, but you always wanted to leave.
Yeah.
This could also be sort of like with like you're saying, like the continuation of The Sea is a Good Place to Think of the Future. And then with, This is a Flag, There is No Wind is, sort of like, okay, let's calm down for a minute. Sort of like this is like sort of like, this is the coda is the natural continuation, but then the flag is sort of like there in the middle, sort of like, okay, let's not get crazy. Things are going to work out fine. And then, as you get here to the end, you're like, oh, they're not. As where possibly The Sea was a suicide attempt that wasn't successful. And, then in This is a Flag mentions they put the both of us on suicide watch. And then, you have then this song, which, is sort of the successful attempt of suicide. And I think it's sort of, when you're in situations like this, it's sort of, there are cries for help and everything like that. And so people on the outside sometimes don't see it. And sometimes, when you're in the middle of it, you don't see it. And you're just sort of like, okay, that's, let's ignore this and, move on and not really address any situations and stuff. And these are things that can happen. And if you're not really invested in a relationship like this, like you should be, then of course you're going to ignore and not look at the bigger problems that are going to, sort of build up over time and everything.
Yeah, and I think this is the point as well, particularly with this, and with this, even though there's a bit of a kind of like almost the typical gallows humor in the previous song, this is a very different kind of tonal shift from the kind of description of, oh, if I die, just throw me, whatever. That's kind of like the gallows humor of like, oh yeah, like kind of like, oh yeah, this is what my view is, but this is the kind of the impact of what happens when somebody else takes that, and the tonal shift is so stark, it's so different. This is like serious, like Campesinos. There's like Gareth's got his kind of on like kind of throws a Garethism, like with I fall to my knees in my piss soaked jeans. Yeah, that's like your typical Gareth kind of like reality description stuff. But it doesn't overtake the kind of seriousness that he's going for in this, and it kind of just leaves you. Okay, yeah, it makes the album leave on a downer, but it sums up the kind of closing of an arc and the growing maturity and realization that's been happening throughout. And yeah, I think it's probably the right way to end the album, to have that kind of highlighted, because then there is a character progression and like development throughout that's like needs to happen.
Yeah, like especially like it makes it the sort of nonchalant, carefree nature of, like, throw my dead body from an airplane or something like that, and the shape of the letter that I make, and everything like that. And then in this song, they described you nude in detail. I knew everything, an artist's impression of the Manhattan skyline. It's sort of like, I was sort of, this is how I didn't realize that somebody's death could impact. I didn't realize that my death could have impacted you this much as yours is impacting mine. That it could have been this serious, and it could have been this heartbreaking. I thought that I wouldn't care, that you wouldn't care, that it would just be another day. And, it's sort of maybe not something I should have joked about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I think it kind of conflicts with the title of the album. The Romance is Boring, where it's like, it may be, but for some other people it's not. It's probably a lot more kind of more pivotal, and again, it's kind of like those kind of contrasts that the band likes to play with. And which I think then leads us to as a kind of like entry for the next album, which is just bleak throughout. So those are like the selection of songs which are my most favourite collection of songs in any album ever.
In companion pieces to this album, I think there's a bonus track that was also released, Too Many Flesh Suppers, which I believe was a B-side on one of the singles, or released on the Japanese edition of this album or something like that. I
can't remember exactly where it was released, but I do remember the bonus track, but I remember getting it separately, and if I'm honest, I'm not that much a fan of it. I think it's a bit too dark. I think it's a bit too dark. And I think as it follows past Coda, I think the darkness and bleakness, I think, goes a bit too much into it. And I don't know, I've never fully clicked with Flesh Suppers as much as I think I should do. But yourself, I mean, what did you think of it?
It was just sort of like, okay, like it's it's another song. So it's kind of like, okay, well, it's the definition of a bonus, but I don't think it really fits into the narration. And I think especially if it's put at the end, it really doesn't, it breaks up that sort of tied up package of what the album is. There's also the EP All's Well That Ends, which are sort of little acoustic versions of some of these songs as well.
I think that was the first time that I think some of them were sung by Kim as well. So this was post Alex leaving. I love the All's Well That Ends version of Letters from Me to Charlotte. I love that section. I love that.
Yeah. There's and all the people who've been waiting for it, who listen to Pick a Disc. The artwork for this album, all the sort of related images and stuff. A woman, the main album, sort of blood on someone's knee on a bed, and you're sort of assuming they're in a state of undress, and then other sort of pictures from the artwork from the singles and stuff like that. Also, there's hands and other sort of I think shoulder or something like that, body parts, visions of or pictures of like underwear or something like that. And I think it all sort of is the overall picture of the sort of oh yeah, I got my reissue right here.
This is one the vinyl I got. I bought. So it's double LP. I ended up buying because I couldn't find a full version of it, so I ended up paying £40 for a used version. So I've not bought the remaster because I've got this one. But yeah, the art. I think there's like a sub address. I think you see in the background of the artwork. But I think the most prominent bit is a blood.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. I think the most prominent bit is that you got the knees, but then on the leg there's like a blood stain. So you got kind of like almost like your university art student for top photo. But then you've got that kind of. I mean, it's obviously either tomato sauce or strawberry kind of.
Yeah.
Strawberry juice for an ice cream thing that's trickled down to pretend to be blood. But yeah, that's supposed to be the kind of juxtaposition of the darkness alongside what might just be kind of a young. Kind of just like Polaroid of someone's knees, which makes it sound more sordid than it actually is. Yeah,
with the remaster of it, the vinyl is also gold, which I think ties into the lyric of the bruise changing colors, and I call it gold or whatever.
Yeah, I think mine, the one I've got is it's just black. So I didn't get the remaster. Because I couldn't afford it. I was buying a ticket in a hotel room for the live show. But
So then that means you've seen them live?
I have, yes. So already this is breaking records for the longest episode of Piggy Disc already. But it's episode 100. This was going to be expected. This is my self-indulgent waffling on. Yeah. So the live. Seeing Los Campesinos live is also like they changed. Like, well, say they changed. I've got 3 first concerts or gigs. The first one I was about 14 and 15. I went to see the pop band Steps in 2000. It was my sister's birthday present, and we all went as a family. The next one I went to was the Killers. In 2004, I was 18, and it cost me £7 to go and see the Killers because it was promoting Mr. Brightside. It was before Hot Fuzz was released.
Oh wow!
And that and anyone who follows my personal Instagram knows that I'm constantly going off to watch live bands. This year I passed my 400 gig.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so. The Killers, I had such a good time at that Killers gig that my next gig was 5.5 years later. And that was on Monday, the 26th of October, 2009, at the Deaf Institute in Manchester, where Los Campesinos played. I was so much into this band that they announced a tour. They weren't playing Birmingham. I'd not really been to a gig as much before. aside from the Killers one, where I didn't really, my first instance of a mosh pit wasn't wasn't good. Yeah, I think I spent a good 15 minutes just wandering around the back of 15 minutes of that Killer set, just trying to find a bottle of water. But then I drove all the way to Manchester. It was the furthest I've ever driven as well in my car, because I only had I only had the car like about 7 months, and I still was slightly a bit iffy about driving on the motorway and everything. But the love of the band meant I wanted to go and watch this band. Drove all the way there and absolutely loved it. I've got video that was done on. I still had a stills camera, so I took my phone and a separate stills camera when this was when phone cameras weren't as good. And I've got video of some of the songs playing. There are videos online of that gig, and there were full songs of decent quality as well, not bad for 2009, and they were filmed by the person in front of me. So if you want more or less just a near experience of what I saw at that gig, I can send you a couple of links to those videos. Since then, that was the light, the blue lit touch paper that set me off to go and pretty much kick off live music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I then went to go and see the band. I went to see like the Sounds later that year, which is one of that's it next month, and then gradually started watching more bands. I went to go. I've seen the Joy Formidable, as you said. I went to see them in 2011, but that was because of Los Campesinos, and I've now eventually went to see. I've seen them now 9 times. I've seen them 9 times. 8 times they were headlining. Yes, I've seen them in. I've seen them just before the headline set festival. I've seen them at the Rainbow a few times. When I went to see them in 2010 at the Rainbow, just after this came out, I remember because I remember when I first listened to the album, I was like, "Oh, the album's all right," but there's a few songs didn't go. They opened with "I Just Sighed," and that live performance sold me on that song.
Wow!
They opened with that song, and that sold me. Couple of key dates as well. In 2014, they played a venue called the Flapper in Birmingham, and it's like 150 cap venue. It's sold out. There is video of them singing Avocado Baby from No Blues. It was like kind of like tied into Doc Martens and everything. So there's a video of them recording. There's a video of them performing that, and so you can see them with a couple of shots of what they're wearing on their feet. That you will see me. I am pretty much on the front row, but I am pretty much obscured for the majority of the video by the people because of the angle of the camera. Apart from the point that you'll see me, there's a bit in that song where it goes, to the man that will be driving your hearse, and then suddenly there's a bit where you'll see me, top of my lungs, going hearse, right on that video. But that's still one of my favourite gigs. But the amount, because it was November, so it was cold outside, but everyone was jumping around and sweaty. Sweat was dripping from the ceiling. And that's, it was a proper basement show. And I remember one of my other favourite bands, 24, and they was supporting that day. Yeah, but then they went to go and see, they then went to the Herons Against, and then they did 2 anniversary gigs that I've seen them at. They did a year's anniversary, they did 10 years of Hold On There Youngster and We Are Beautiful, We Are Doomed. And I remember buying and staying at a hotel in London because that was the date of that was Saturday 13th, which is actually my birthday. So my 33rd birthday was me going to a Los Campesinos gig, where they did a medley of the first 2 albums, and it was amazing. And then in February 2020 was the last time I saw them. They performed this album all the way through, and a second set of the songs from all the other stuff for the 10th anniversary of this album, and that was in February 2020. Which again was great. I mean, they performed 2 nights on the trot, but I couldn't make the Friday, so I went on the Saturday. But yeah, they performed all this album. I've been waiting for them. I think that was like the second time they only ever played This Is a Flag. They played This Is a Flag at that Flapper show that I was talking about just. Yeah, which is one of the reasons I liked it, even though I think Gareth's voice went the second song in. So it was quite gravelly, the most of it. And what's found quite funny is that at the the Islington in London when we went to see them. There was quite. This was just as like COVID was starting to kick in, so there's a lot of signs everywhere saying "wash your hands" and everything like that. So I was like, oh, okay, right, okay, this might be serious. So this was before everything closed in March, but I remember that happening. So like, I'll be on the tube in London, where like the people saying just wash your hands after holding on the rails and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the last time that I saw them. They've played a few shows. They've toured the US since then. They toured last year.
I think they just came here this year. I think in the summer it was all just like it was like I think a couple shows in the Midwest and a couple shows the East Coast or something like that. There was like I was like, oh, come on, come over to this side. I got to see this.
Yeah, they couldn't. I don't think they could reach the West Coast at this point.
Yeah.
They played a couple. They played I think Leeds, London, and Cardiff. But I would have driven to the Cardiff show, but it was on a Monday. So Cardiff is just like about an hour and a half's drive from me. And I would have driven to that, but it was on a Monday, and I couldn't get the time off work. Yeah, so I've not been able to see them since. But they're still kind of active, and I think they were meant to headline Indie Tracks Festival in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
but they couldn't get to it. And well, because then the festival kind of had to not take part because of COVID, and then the festival said they couldn't survive, so it couldn't come back. So annoyingly, I would have seen them headline a festival if it wasn't for COVID. So I've seen them live, and quite a couple of their gigs are my favorite gigs of all time. So you've not seen them live?
No, I haven't had a chance to see them live.
Ah, it's a shame. I think they are more likely to tour the US because I think they draw bigger crowds in the US than they do in the UK.
Yeah, it's weird though because like you are probably the first person that I found that knows this band as well, and as we were kind of like talking to each other like on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah,
I think because of the Lily and Hannah Society, it was me a Gen X podcast connection. That's how I became aware of you. And then I think talking about Los Campesinos.
Yeah.
One day you were, and I replied, it's like, oh, hey, I know about them too. And this is kind of how the whole thing came about, I think. And it's...
Yeah, I was like, this was like ages ago saying, I am gonna cover Los Campesinos for the episode 100. Just make sure you're free around October 2020, 2022. And it's like, oh yeah, definitely. But no, yeah, I mean, I think they're great live. I've never seen them. The only thing I've never seen them live with Alex. When I first saw them, it was Kim. So I've never saw them with Alex. But yeah, on that first gig I saw them in Manchester. They performed "Romance Is Boring." But that was before it was released. So they played a couple of new songs, and "Romance Is Boring" was one of them.
Yeah, this if this talk about the album hasn't made you hungry to seek this out and everything, Metacritic gives this a score of 75. Enemy gave this an 8 out of 10 review, saying it's a significant step forward in comparison to previous material. Pitchfork gave it an 8.3 out of 10. Generally a well-reviewed sort of album. It's like, it should be higher though, but I think if more people knew about this band at the time when this album came out, it would have the score would definitely be higher. So yeah, generally positive reviews there for the album. I think that if more people had known about this band when the album came out, that the scores would have been higher than just 75. It doesn't say it sounds okay, but I mean it should be at least in the 80s.
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh, it should be 110. To me anyway, but yeah, definitely.
Was there a certain review that you said the pitchfork rating or something like that? I mean, was there something that they had in there?
Yeah, I always quite like looking to see what the pitchfork review is like, because pitchfork is always quite entertaining. Yeah, so like, for example, when they kind of flamed Taylor Swift's Reputation and then given Mika 1.5, an 8.3 is ridiculously high in comparison. But yeah, the pitchfork review, very complimentary. It does kind of mention about kind of Gareth maturing and how the band seems to move from their kind of I don't think like almost yelpy start and then moving into new ones. What's quite interesting is that who wrote this? Paul Thompson. He mentions in practically a year's time, Gareth went from phrase turning scene critiquing clever kid to a sad sack of Stephen Patrick Morrissey proportions, while his band loosened up and billowed out, their grandiose pop growing at once messier and more symphonic. It's been pretty good. So the Morrissey comparison probably not aging as well as it should do, but but no, I can see that because I think there is actually quite a strong Morrissey influence, I think, on Gareth as well at times.
Yeah, I think Gareth is vegetarian or vegan as well. I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of the lazy, I guess, comparison you can make then from that.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that.
Yeah. So if do you think that this album is where people should start listening to this band?
I think so. Yeah, because I think this is a good kind of level for people. I mean, yeah, I don't think they don't get to this level. I'll mention another album in a second, but I think this is a good barometer because you can go from this, so you can either go backwards. So We Are Beautiful, We Are Doomed is like kind of the darker B-sides of the Hold On Now Youngster recordings. So We Are Beautiful, We Are Doomed is very similar to this album, and then Hold On Now Youngster is very kind of scrappy, kind of upbeat. It's a roller coaster. There's no sad slow songs on it whatsoever. I love it to bits, but it is very much a lot more twee, a lot more energetic, a lot more sugary. But we still, and I think Gareth's voice is about 3 octaves higher. But then if you get but my love for Hold On Now Youngster is the second Los Campesinos album that's in my top tier albums. It's Los Campesinos are one of 3 bands that have got more than one album in my top tier albums. The other being Blink-182, and the other being The Killers. Yeah. On the other end, Hello Sadness. Hello Sadness is very bleak. It's very dark. It's my least favourite of the Los Campesinos albums. I don't dislike it, but there are songs that I could easily skip a couple of songs on that track. Sometimes it dips towards almost Flesh Supper's style darkness. The last song, I can't remember the name of it. It's like he's basically talking about being strung up on an abattoir. That's too dark for me, I think. But it's still got some really kind of singles and some good songs on there. Hello Sadness is great. The Dark Slow Blackbird is amazing. Three Lions Divorce is just basically the football song linking breakups to when England get kicked out of international football tournaments. No Blues gets a lot of slack. I think they hardly got any money and promotion behind it, but there's a good few songs on there. Avocado Baby's great. Their latest, which was released in 2017, Six Scenes. Six Scenes is their best album since this one. To the point where I'm debating whether it's a top tier album, because every time I listen to it, it gets better and better. Six Scenes feels like it's harkening back towards the sound of like Romantic Boring, but with a more polished kind of Paul Heaton-esque way of doing things.
Yeah.
So it's a very more polished. It doesn't have, because Harriet left after Romantic Boring, so the violin's not there. But yeah, the songwriting is mature. It's great. Hung Empty is one of my favourite Los Campesinos songs. It's probably the best album closer they've had. I think if you like this, check out Six Scenes. Check out Hold On Now Youngster, just so you can get how varied they can sound. And then perhaps dip in.
Yeah.
If you quite liked the way Six Scenes was, No Blues and Hello Sadness is probably your next bet. And then go and check out We Are Beautiful, We Are Doomed, which feels really weird way to say this, because I love We Are Beautiful, We Are Doomed, but I think if you go, it's a very weird way of entering it. I think if you went in with Hold On Now Youngster as your first Los Campesinos album, I think, depending on how old you are, and if you was like 19, 2008, you might struggle.
Yeah.
I think, I think Six Scenes next, Hold On Now Youngster, and then feel your own way through the rest.
No love for the Christmas EP? Oh, no, I'm joking.
I haven't listened to that as much as I should do, actually. Kindle Flame's really good. But then I keep forgetting the rest. Whole Damn Body, the EP that came out a while, not too long ago, which I think was, I think it was like a mixture of Hello Sadness B-sides.
Yeah.
Some of that's really good. I think, but I do think it kind of misses a bit of the kind of stuff that I quite like from their 16s era. Because I really quite like the direction they went in there. Whole Damn Body though is a really good song. I like that because it's the writing sleeper hits for these weeping dipshits, and a bunch of and basically a bunch of people were messaging the Twitter account. Are we the weeping dipshits? And to the point where I think the Las Campesinos fan base are just referring to themselves as the weeping dipshits from now on.
Hell yeah! Every fan base needs a cool name. Matt, it was great talking to you about Los Campesinos. I get to fan out about this band for a change.
Yeah, for nearly 2.5 hours.
Yeah. You'll edit it down shorter than that, right? It'll end up being just a quick night tight hour, right?
Yeah,
no way. I'm not cutting any of this out. All my stuff is gold.
Yeah, no, this is episode 100. It's going to be episode 100. It's my self-indulgence. I've been waiting to talk about this. This album was the first album that I put on the spreadsheet when I first started planning the podcast. Everything's been leading up for me to talk about this album. Episode 100 is the treat for me for getting to 100 albums, and and I couldn't wish for a better host to guide me through it. So thank you ever so much, Branden.
Oh well, thank you. I'm sorry. No.
But thank you very so much. So I'm gonna go and just prize the control of the podcast from you. Here we go. I'm back in the host seat now. Yes. Here we go. Yes, I'm into the triple figures.
Sorry if it's oddly warm.
Yeah,
I know it's. You sit on a toilet seat and it's warm. It's kind of like, oh, who's been here before? Oh.
A metaphor quite Los Campesinos, I think. But I'm going to take control back. And before we go, here we go, as I do for all Matt picks, and it's not changing even if it's because of the 100th episode. The song for the Hall of Fame playlist. I've always said that it's not me that's going to decide what goes on there. So I'm going to give perhaps the most pressured decision on the podcast so far, where I'm going to ask Branden to pick one song to go onto the playlist Hall of Fame. For anyone who's not listened to this before, this is where I ask the guests to pick a song to go on to a playlist alongside all other songs that guests have picked in the past. I can't veto his decision, so whatever he says goes. Now, you're in safe hands because I love this album, so I'm not going to judge you for picking any of the. I'm not going to judge you for any of your picks. So I'm going to leave you free to pick a song that you want to add on. So, Branden, which song are you going to pick to mark the first song in the triple digits of Pick a Disc?
Oh man, this is
the way to the legacy.
Now this is pressure. Now I know how it feels. Oh my
You've got
gosh.
You've got 99 years behind and 99 years ahead of you. It's 200 Pick a Disc songs in perfect symmetry.
My first instinct is fighting against itself. We got Romance is Boring, the title track of the album, and then also Straight In at 101, which you have the sort of thesis, I guess, of the album, and then you also just sort of have the high energy sort of rock for the album. And oh man, I think to introduce this album to people who aren't aware of it and the band too, I think Romance is Boring is the choice here to get people into this.
No, I see your rationale, and I completely agree with you. I think if people listen to the playlist, I think the advert for this album should be the title track.
Yeah.
So, no, I completely agree with you. So, Romance is Boring is the 100th song to go onto the Hall of Fame playlist. And, you know what? There are no complaints from me. So...
Okay, oh man. Oh, sweating over here.
Yeah, the pressure's off, Branden. You can relax now. You can enjoy the rest of your day. So, here we are, 2.5 hours in. 2.5 hours in. Peek behind the curtain. About 10 minutes ago, we had an almost panic attack when Zencaster threw a mare, and I thought I was going to lose 2 hours worth of recording, and thankfully we didn't. I was like, didn't, and I was like, 100 years for a technical fault. But, Branden, I was going to say again, thank you ever so much for donating a good chunk of your morning. And I know it's quite early morning for you there, and I can't say into words how much I fully appreciate you donating your time for this amount of time to indulge me just talking about Los Campesinos, and I'm forever in debt. So thank you ever so much for taking on the task and doing it so well.
Oh, you're welcome.
So well.
Of course. And now you can go back if you want to listen to this episode again and see how my voice has changed as I've woken up from being super low and gravelly or something in the morning. And now it's more sort of, oh, no, I got 2 cups of coffee in me. And this is about more how my voice normally is.
Yeah. So you gone from late night radio DJ to podcast host, general podcast host. But so Branden, if people want to find you and listen to your podcast, where can they find you?
You can go to betterbandpod.com, and that'll let you listen to episodes there. You can subscribe from there on any of your podcast apps that you use, on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff, Better Band Pod. It's called branding, and I did it. Better Band Podcast. Talk to people about Pearl Jam, going through their albums track by track. And we get into some weird making connections, like stuff that we talked about on here. So if you have any inclination to check out me anymore, then you can do that.
Thank you so much. And I recommend to go and listen to Better Band Pod. And that's it. We're now basically at the end of episode 100 with far too many kind of panics of Zencaster cutting out. So again, thank you ever so much for coming on. So, Branden.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and episode 100, that's 100 episodes done. So I'm not sure what to do next. Yeah, I mean, you know what? Where's the spreadsheet? Episode 200.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This podcast network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/WeMadeThis. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
If you're a fan of British comedy, particularly broadcast on the BBC, that's been going for a decade or 3, try Shipwrecked and Comatose, covering all of Red Dwarf, including those additional specials, heroes and their foes. Anything else, well, who knows? So find us on your podcast apps and be greeted by some friendly chaps and Mark's deep obsession with all cats. It's Shipwrecked and Comatose. We're not on Insta, it's Twitter's hard mode. Red Dwarf Pods are social. Both subscribe and enjoy us a load.